My name is Nancy Belcher, and I was 29 years old when I learned how easily people can turn your discomfort into something you're expected to apologize for. Here's how my story begins. I had been with Daniel Morris for 14 months. We didn't live together, but our lives were tightly intertwined in ways that felt intentional and serious. Weekends flowed naturally between our apartments. We kept spare clothes at each other's places. We talked about trips we hadn't taken yet and futures we assumed were unfolding in parallel. I genuinely believed we were solid, built on honesty, mutual respect, and the kind of trust that didn't require explanations before questions were even asked. That belief cracked late on a Thursday night. It was a little after 11 p.m. when my phone lit up on the nightstand. I remember feeling that familiar warmth when I saw Daniel's name. I assumed it was something mundane, maybe a goodnight text or a quick update about working late. Instead, I sat up in bed as I read the message, then read it again slower because my brain didn't immediately accept what it was seeing. Hey babe, just a heads up. I'm going to stay at my coworker's place tonight. We're working late on the quarterly presentation, and it makes more sense than driving home at 2 a.m. His girlfriend is totally cool with it. Why aren't you? What struck me first wasn't jealousy or fear. It was the phrasing. Daniel wasn't asking how I felt. He wasn't checking in. He was informing me of a decision that had already been made and then framing my reaction as the problem before I'd even had a chance to respond. There was also the casual way he used someone else's supposed approval as leverage. His girlfriend is totally cool with it. As if that should automatically override any feelings I might have, as if another woman's consent, one I'd never even heard of before, somehow settled the issue. Some context matters. Daniel had been mentioning this coworker, Lucas Bennett, for about 3 months. Always casually, always in passing. Same project team, long hours, shared deadlines. I had never met Lucas in person. I had certainly never met his girlfriend, and until that moment, I didn't even know she existed. Yet now, she was being used as proof that everything was harmless and that I was the only one making things weird. I stared at the last line again. Why aren't you? It didn't read like curiosity. It read like a challenge, like a quiet accusation that something was wrong with me for not immediately falling in line. I typed back carefully, because I'm not. His response came almost immediately. Seriously, it's just crashing on a couch. Don't be insecure. There it was, the word people reach for when they don't want to examine their own behavior. I felt my jaw tighten as I replied. I'm not insecure. I'm uncomfortable. There's a difference. A brief pause followed, then another message. His girlfriend literally said, it's fine. She knows nothing's going on. Why do you have to make this weird? I stared at my screen, irritation mixing with something colder, something sharper. You've never mentioned his girlfriend before, I wrote. How do I even know she exists? The typing bubble appeared almost instantly. OMG, she exists. They've been together like 3 years. Do you want me to send you her LinkedIn or something? You're being ridiculous. Ridiculous. Another convenient label. I took a slow breath before responding. Actually, yes. Send me her contact info. That was the moment I expected him to pull back to realize how strange this all sounded from the outside. I thought he might get defensive and decide to just drive home or at least acknowledge that the situation looked questionable. Instead, my phone buzzed again, almost immediately. A phone number appeared on my screen. There. Happy now, he wrote. Text her yourself if you don't believe me. This is getting exhausting. Exhausting. As if my discomfort were the inconvenience here, not the situation itself. I stared at the number for a long moment, then flipped my phone face down on the bed. The apartment was quiet, and in that silence, something settled in my chest. Not anger exactly, but clarity. Whatever I did next, I realized would reveal whether the situation was truly as innocent as Daniel insisted, or whether it was built on something much shakier. I picked the phone back up, opened a new message, and accepted the invitation he had so confidently handed me. I didn't call her. I didn't ask a polite, carefully worded question. I didn't introduce myself or ease into the conversation the way someone trying to keep the peace might. Daniel had framed this as a simple verification, and I treated it exactly that way. I sent her a screenshot of the text Daniel had just sent me, the one that said his girlfriend was totally cool with the sleepover. Then I added a single message beneath it. Hi, I'm Nancy Daniel's girlfriend. He sent me this tonight and gave me your number to verify it. I just wanted to make sure you're actually aware that he's planning to stay over at your apartment with my boyfriend. I stared at the screen for a moment after sending it, then set my phone face down on the coffee table. I made myself a cup of chamomile tea and tried to convince my body to relax. I knew on some level that whatever came next wasn't going to be pleasant, but I also knew that if everything Daniel said was true, this would be over in minutes. She would reply that she knew that it was fine, and that would be the end of it. I went to bed shortly after telling myself that clarity, whatever form it came in, was better than quiet doubt. The next morning, my phone woke me before my alarm ever had the chance. At 6:52 a.m., the vibration rattled it across my nightstand. I grabbed it groggily, already sensing something was wrong. The screen was filled with missed calls and notifications stacked on top of one another in a way that made my stomach drop. 3 missed calls from Daniel, 2 missed calls from an unknown number, 1 missed call from another unfamiliar number. There were also more than 20 text messages spread across all 3 contacts. Some were frantic, some were furious, a few were apologetic. None of them said, "This is all a misunderstanding." I sat up against the headboard and started reading. From Daniel. What did you do? Why would you text her? You literally ruined everything. It was innocent. Nothing happened. Nothing was going to happen. You need to call me right now. This isn't a joke. From one of the unknown numbers, which I would later learn belonged to Lucas. What the hell is wrong with you? You just destroyed my relationship over absolutely nothing. She was just crashing on my couch after work. You're psycho. And then there was a message from the other number, the one that mattered most. Thank you for telling me. I had no idea about any of this. I'm so sorry you're dealing with this too. We should talk when you have a chance. I read that message twice before the full weight of it sank in. She hadn't known. Not about the sleepover. Not about Daniel being there. Not about any of it. As the morning unfolded and more messages trickled in, I pieced together what had happened overnight. When she received my screenshot around 11:30 p.m., she apparently sat there staring at it, trying to make sense of what she was reading. Then she grabbed her keys and drove straight home. She had been alone that night, believing her boyfriend of 3 years was working late and planning to stay at a friend's place downtown because he had an early meeting the next morning. That was the story he had given her. What she actually walked into was something very different. Daniel and Lucas were sitting on the couch together when she arrived. A laptop was open on the coffee table, a half-finished presentation pulled up on the screen. Netflix was playing in the background, the glow of some mindless show filling the room. Midnight had come and gone, and whatever they claimed they were doing, it didn't look like something that required lies to multiple people. According to her, the confrontation was immediate and explosive. She demanded to know why Daniel was in her apartment when she had been told he wasn't even there. She demanded to know why she was finding out about a sleepover from a stranger instead of from her own boyfriend. Daniel apparently tried to explain that everything was innocent, that nothing had happened, and nothing was going to happen, that they were just working late and it made sense for him to stay over. What he couldn't explain was why Lucas had lied to her in the first place. If this had all been so harmless, why tell her he was staying somewhere else entirely? Lucas tried to brush it off as a misunderstanding. He claimed he'd forgotten to mention that Daniel would be there. Forgotten to mention that another woman would be sleeping in their apartment. Forgotten to mention something that anyone with even a basic sense of boundaries would know mattered. She didn't believe him. Years of small doubts came pouring out late nights that didn't add up. Vague explanations, text messages she'd glimpsed but never questioned because she wanted to trust him. The argument spiraled, fueled by months of ignored instincts and one very clear lie that she could no longer explain away. Daniel left the apartment around 1:00 a.m. and drove home. After that, he spent hours trying to call me, each unanswered call stacking on top of the last. I had silenced my phone after sending that message not out of spite, but because I knew whatever fallout came from it deserved a clear head, not a reactive one. Sitting there that morning, phone in hand, one thought kept circling back. No matter how I looked at it, if this situation had truly been innocent, none of this would have happened. A single honest conversation would have prevented everything. Instead, honesty had been the one thing missing. I set my phone down, made myself a strong cup of coffee, and prepared for the conversation I knew was coming next. I didn't call Daniel back immediately. I needed a few minutes to let the caffeine settle and my thoughts line up in a way that wouldn't collapse into defensiveness or anger the second he spoke. By the time I dialed his number, it was just after 8 in the morning. He answered before the first ring finished. Finally, he said. His voice was tight, already loaded with accusation. Do you have any idea what you've caused? I verified information you gave me, I replied, keeping my tone steady. You told me his girlfriend was fine with it. She wasn't. She didn't even know it was happening. There was a brief silence, then a sharp exhale, because he probably forgot to tell her. It wasn't a big deal until you made it into one. He told her he was staying at a friend's place, I said. Not that he was at his own apartment with another woman sleeping there. That's not my problem, Daniel snapped. That's between them. It became my problem when you used her supposed approval to shut me down, I said. You gave me her number. I asked a direct question. The answer I got wasn't the one you gave me. You went behind my back and contacted a stranger to stir up drama, he shot back. You completely violated my trust. I almost laughed, but the sound died in my throat. You handed me her number and told me to text her if I didn't believe you. I did exactly what you suggested. I didn't think you'd actually do it, he said. It was supposed to reassure you, show you I had nothing to hide. Then why did it blow everything up, I asked. If there was really nothing to hide, she would have said she knew and that it was fine. That would have been the end of it. He didn't answer right away. I could hear his breathing on the other end of the line, fast and uneven, like he was searching for a version of reality that worked better in his favor. You know what he finally said? I need space from this conversation. I can't talk to you right now. You've completely crossed a line. The irony of that almost made me dizzy. You lied to me by omission, dismissed my concerns, and challenged me to verify your story. I did. The story fell apart. That's not me crossing a line. I can't do this right now, he repeated, his voice strained. We'll talk later. And then he hung up. I stared at my phone for a long moment after the call ended, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator in my kitchen. The narrative had already shifted in his mind. I wasn't someone reacting to a questionable situation anymore. I was the problem, the disruptor, the one who had ruined something that, according to him, had been perfectly fine before I touched it. Later that morning, I received another message from Lucas's girlfriend, Emily. She apologized again for dragging me into something she hadn't even known existed, and thanked me for telling her the truth. As we exchanged a few more messages, a clearer picture began to form. This hadn't come out of nowhere for her. There had been other moments, other late nights, other explanations that never quite added up. She had ignored them because trusting him felt easier than confronting the possibility that something was wrong. The sleepover hadn't created the fracture, it had simply exposed it. Daniel, on the other hand, seemed determined to treat me as the sole cause of everything unraveling. Over the next 2 days, his messages came in waves, alternating between anger, guilt, and self-pity. One moment he accused me of sabotaging his reputation at work. The next, he insisted that if I had just trusted him, none of this would have happened. By the third day, he stopped texting altogether. That evening, there was a knock on my apartment door just after 7. I hadn't been expecting anyone, and my stomach tightened as soon as I saw Daniel standing there when I opened it. He didn't wait to be invited in. He stepped past me like he still belonged there, like nothing fundamental had shifted between us. We need to talk, he said, pacing into the living room. What you mean is, you need to lecture me, I replied. Do you want to sit down, or are you planning to pace until you feel justified? I'm not sitting, he snapped. This is serious. You single-handedly destroyed a 3-year relationship. His lies destroyed it, I said calmly. I just confirmed them. It wasn't your place, Daniel shot back. That was between him and his girlfriend. It stopped being just between them when you told me she approved of something she didn't even know about, I said. You made it my business. He began pacing, running his hands through his hair in that familiar way he did when he was gearing up for a bigger argument. Do you have any idea what you've done to me at work? People are whispering. They're looking at me differently. Whispering about what I asked. That your coworker lied to his girlfriend and got caught. They think we were having an affair, he said. They think I'm a homewrecker. I looked at him steadily. Were you... He stopped pacing. Excuse me. Were you sleeping with him, I asked. Is that why he felt like he had to lie about you being there? No, he said immediately. Absolutely not. Nothing physical happened. Ever. We were working late and I was tired, so I was going to crash on his couch. That's it. At his apartment, I said, where his girlfriend of 3 years didn't know you'd be, because he lied about being there at all. His voice dropped slightly. I thought she knew. He told me she was fine with it. He said she was chill about stuff like this. So he lied to both of you, I said. He told you she knew. He told her he was somewhere else entirely, and that doesn't concern you. For a brief moment, something shifted in his expression. Confusion, maybe even doubt. The realization that he hadn't been the only one misled. But it didn't last. That still doesn't excuse what you did, he said. You deliberately tried to blow up their relationship. I asked a question, I replied. The answer is what blew it up. He didn't respond. He just stood there, jaw tight, looking less angry now and more unsettled. When he left a few minutes later, he didn't slam the door. He simply walked out quieter than he'd arrived, carrying confusion instead of certainty. And that more than the shouting told me everything I needed to know about what was coming next. The silence after Daniel left didn't last long. By the next morning, it became clear that my role in this story had already been rewritten by people who weren't interested in facts-only outcomes. In their version, I wasn't someone who had verified a lie. I was the person who had caused unnecessary chaos by refusing to stay in my lane. Emily texted me again that day. She told me she and Lucas were officially done. 3 years together ended in less than 48 hours. She wasn't dramatic about it, just tired, relieved in a way that felt heavier than anger. As she started going through his phone with clearer eyes, she found messages that didn't sit right. Names she didn't recognize, patterns she could no longer dismiss as coincidences. Nothing that proved Daniel and Lucas had been having an affair, but enough to confirm that the man she thought she knew had been comfortable bending the truth for a long time. The sleepover was just the last straw, she wrote. I think I needed something undeniable. I understood that feeling more than I wanted to admit. Daniel, meanwhile, went quiet for 2 full days. No messages, no calls, just enough silence to feel deliberate. On the 4th day, his mother called me. I'd only met Margaret Morris twice in the entire time Daniel and I had been together. Both encounters had been polite, surface level, the kind of interactions that never hint at future conflict. Her voice on the phone that afternoon was controlled but sharp, the tone of someone who had already decided where the fault lay. I don't know what kind of game you think you're playing, she said, but you've upset my son terribly. And frankly, I think you owe him an apology. I'm not playing any games, I replied. Your son told me another woman was fine with him staying overnight at her apartment. She wasn't fine with it because she didn't even know it was happening. You went behind his back and contacted strangers, she said. That's a violation of trust. He gave me her number, I said evenly. He told me to verify it myself. I did. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. He didn't tell me that part, she said finally. I'm not surprised, I replied. Well, she continued, her voice softening just slightly. Regardless of the details, relationships require trust. You should have trusted his judgment. I trusted the information he gave me, I said. It turned out to be false. That isn't a failure on my part. She didn't argue after that. The call ended with a vague comment about hoping we could work through this, which felt less like encouragement and more like an obligation she'd checked off her list. 2 days later, I ran into Lucas himself. I had just come back from the grocery store when I noticed him leaning against his car in my apartment complex's parking lot. I recognized him from photos Daniel had shown me over the month's office events team, outings, casual snapshots. He looked worse in person. Unshaven, exhausted, wearing clothes that looked like he'd slept in them. We need to talk, he said as I approached. Do we? I replied, shifting the grocery bags in my hands. You cost me my relationship, he said. 3 years gone because of you. Your lies cost you your relationship, I said. I just confirmed them. There was nothing going on between me and Daniel, he insisted. Nothing physical, ever. Then why did you tell your girlfriend you were staying somewhere else, I asked. Why not just tell her the truth? He looked away, jaw tight. It was easier. She can be insecure. She would have overreacted. So instead of dealing with her reaction, you lied to her completely, I said. And somehow this is my fault. It was a white lie, he snapped, to avoid drama. And how did that work out for you, I asked. He stepped closer, close enough that I could smell stale coffee on his breath. For a few seconds, I thought he might actually try something. Instead, his shoulders dropped. You and him deserve each other, he muttered. You're both miserable people. Then he got into his car and drove away. I stood there for a moment after he left, my hands shaking slightly as the adrenaline faded. What struck me most wasn't his anger. It was how easily everyone involved had justified lying as long as it kept things comfortable. That night, as I sat alone in my apartment, the pattern finally clicked. This wasn't about a couch or a sleepover or even a coworker. It was about how quickly people expect you to accept deception when telling the truth might make someone uncomfortable. And Daniel had expected me to be one of those people. By the 5th day, the anger had cooled into something quieter and more unsettling. It wasn't grief yet, and it wasn't relief either. It was the growing awareness that the version of Daniel I'd been defending in my head no longer lined up with the person I was actually dealing with. He texted me that afternoon. Can we talk tonight properly? The message was carefully worded, almost formal, as if he were scheduling a meeting, instead of reaching out to someone he'd spent over a year building a life with. I told him he could come by after dinner. When he arrived, he didn't look angry. He looked tired. His shoulders slumped slightly as he stepped into my apartment, and for a split second, I felt the familiar pull to soften to make things easier for him. 14 months doesn't disappear overnight. We sat on opposite ends of the couch, the same place we'd watched movies and eaten takeout more times than I could count. The space between us felt deliberate. "I've been thinking a lot," Daniel began, "about everything that happened, about what it says about us." I stayed quiet, letting him continue. "And I've realized something," he said. "You don't trust me. Not really. And a relationship can't survive without trust." I nodded slowly. "Go on." "You texted a complete stranger instead of believing me," he said. "That tells me everything I need to know about how you see me." "I texted her because you gave me her number and told me to verify it myself," I replied. "I didn't snoop through your phone or ambush anyone. I did exactly what you suggested." "I didn't think you'd actually do it," he said, shaking his head. "I thought you'd realize you were being ridiculous and just trust me." "So you called my bluff," I said. "And I called yours. Except mine wasn't a bluff. I wanted the truth." He flinched slightly at that, as if the framing stung more than he expected. "I never cheated on you," he said quickly. "Not once. Nothing physical happened. Ever." "I'm willing to believe that," I said. "But you were comfortable benefiting from a lie. You were fine being alone in another man's apartment late at night while his girlfriend was being lied to about where he was. That's not nothing." "That wasn't my lie to fix," he argued. "How is that my responsibility?" "It became your responsibility when you used it," I said. "And when I questioned it, your first instinct wasn't to reflect. It was to tell me I was insecure." He looked down at his hands. The silence stretched. "I really did love you," he said finally, his voice quieter now. "I know," I replied. "I loved you too. But love doesn't work when honesty is optional." He didn't argue with that. He just nodded slowly, as if something had finally settled into place. "So we're done?" he asked. "I think you came here already knowing the answer," I said. "I'm just agreeing with it." He stood up, gathering the few things he'd left at my place over the months: a charger, a hoodie, a paperback he'd never finished. Watching it all fit easily into a single bag felt heavier than the conversation itself. At the door, he paused. "I hope one day you realize you overreacted." I didn't respond. The door closed softly behind him. And for the first time since this all started, I felt something close to peace. The days after the breakup were quieter than I expected. Not peaceful exactly, but still. The kind of stillness that comes after a storm when you're not sure yet what's been damaged and what's simply gone. I kept expecting my phone to buzz with a message from Daniel. Some last attempt to reframe the story, to soften the ending, but it didn't. Whatever certainty he'd reached on my couch seemed to hold. Emily and I exchanged a few more messages that week. She had moved out of the apartment she'd shared with Lucas and was staying with her sister while she figured out next steps. She told me she'd started therapy partly to process the breakup and partly to understand why she'd ignored so many warning signs for so long. There was sadness in her messages, but also something steadier, like relief disguised as exhaustion. Lucas, according to mutual whispers I heard through Daniel's workplace, wasn't doing well. He was scrambling to find a new place he could afford on his own, and his reputation at work had taken a hit. He'd been telling anyone who would listen that I was unstable, controlling, that I'd destroyed his life over nothing. Some people believed him. Most didn't. The story of a man lying to his girlfriend about being alone with a female coworker didn't play well no matter how he tried to package it. Daniel's mother called once more. I didn't answer. Her number lit up my screen for a few seconds before disappearing again, and that felt like the right amount of closure for that conversation. One night, about a week later, Daniel's best friend sent me a message calling me an insecure control freak who had ruined a good relationship. I read it once, felt the familiar urge to defend myself, and then left it on read. I didn't need to convince anyone anymore. The people who mattered already understood, and the ones who didn't weren't going to be persuaded by a text message. There were moments, usually late at night, when I missed Daniel. Not the version of him from the end, but the version from the beginning, the man who laughed easily, who felt safe, who didn't make me second-guess my own instincts. 14 months isn't nothing, and grief doesn't disappear just because the decision was right. But every time that ache surfaced, my mind returned to the text that started everything. His girlfriend is totally cool with it. Why aren't you? Not because of the sleepover itself, but because of what it revealed. I had been expected to swallow discomfort quietly, to trust without verification, to prioritize someone else's convenience over my own boundaries. I realized then that what unsettled me most wasn't the possibility that Daniel had cheated. It was how easily he dismissed my right to question something that felt wrong. How quickly honesty became optional when it threatened comfort. That wasn't the kind of relationship I wanted to mourn my way back into. By the end of the second week, the narrative around me had settled. Some people thought I overreacted. Others thought I'd done the only reasonable thing. I stopped trying to categorize myself through their opinions. What mattered was that I could sit alone in my apartment phone, silent, and feel grounded instead of anxious. I hadn't destroyed anything. I had refused to participate in a lie. And that I was learning comes with a different kind of peace. By the time 2 weeks had passed, there was nothing left to confront. No more explanations to give. No final messages waiting to be answered. The story had reached its natural end, not with a dramatic explosion, but with quiet distance settling into place. Daniel and I hadn't spoken since the night he walked out of my apartment with a single bag of his things. No accidental texts, no late-night check-ins disguised as concern. Whatever version of closure he needed, he'd found it in believing that I was the one who had broken something that was otherwise fine. Emily reached out once more to let me know she was doing okay. Not great, but clearer. She told me she'd stopped replaying the night. Everything blew up and started looking further back, instead at all the moments she'd brushed aside, because trusting him felt easier than confronting uncertainty. She thanked me again, not dramatically, just honestly. We weren't friends exactly, but there was a quiet understanding between us. We had both been handed a version of the truth that didn't hold up under even the lightest pressure. Lucas faded out of the story after that. The last I heard, he was still telling anyone who would listen that I was unstable, that I'd overreacted, that everything would have been fine if I'd just stayed out of it. I didn't bother correcting him. People who needed that explanation were always going to believe it, and people who understood boundaries didn't need convincing. As for Daniel, I don't actually know how he's doing now. His mother never called again. His friends stopped messaging. The space where he used to exist in my daily life slowly closed in on itself, not painfully, but decisively. What remained wasn't bitterness. It was clarity. I thought a lot about that original text message. His girlfriend is totally cool with it. Why aren't you? Not because of the situation itself, but because of the assumption underneath it. That discomfort is something to justify, that boundaries are flaws. That trust means never asking questions even when something feels off. I don't regret what I did. When someone hands you a phone number and challenges you to verify their story that isn't betrayal, that's an invitation. If the story had been true, nothing would have happened. She would have said she knew. She would have said it was fine, and the night would have ended quietly. But it wasn't true, and that truth didn't destroy anything solid. It simply exposed what had already been unstable. Some people will read this and decide I overreacted, that I should have trusted him, let it go, stayed quiet. Maybe that version of me would still be in a relationship, but she'd also still be swallowing doubts, explaining away discomfort, and learning to ignore her own instincts for the sake of peace. That's not who I want to be. I don't call it insecurity. I call it standards. And I've learned that the right people never ask you to lower them just to make their lives easier. My name is Juanita Boyles, 34 years old. For most of my adult life, I believed stability was something you built slowly, brick by brick, with discipline and patience, not something you stumbled into by luck. That belief carried me through 12 demanding years in tech, starting as an intern who fetched coffee and debugged code at midnight, climbing my way up to a senior software architect role at a major company. 6 figures, stock options, long hours. Constant pressure. None of it fell into my lap. Every promotion came at the cost of missed weekends, canceled plans, and a master's degree earned while working full-time. I didn't just have a career, I had a foundation I'd poured myself into. When I married my husband, I thought that foundation was something we stood on together. He worked in pharmaceutical sales. Solid job, decent commissions, around $85,000 a year. He liked to say he was doing just fine, and technically he was. But our life, the penthouse apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows, the vacations, the dinners we didn't check prices for, existed because of my income. Our rent alone was over $6,000 a month covered by my salary. His contribution went toward his car payment, his hobbies, and about $1,500 a month for shared expenses. At the time I didn't keep score. We were married. What was mine was ours. Or so I thought. We'd been together 6 years, married for 4. I supported him through 2 job losses, paid for his car when it was repossessed before we got married, reassured him when he felt behind his peers. I told myself that was partnership. That love sometimes meant carrying more weight when the other person needed it. Things felt fine. Not perfect, but stable, comfortable. Until 3 weeks ago when he asked me to sit down after dinner. He had that tone people use when they're about to deliver news they've rehearsed. Serious, careful, almost ceremonial. For a split second, I wondered if someone had died. We need to talk about our future, he said. My stomach tightened. I nodded, bracing myself. He talked about values, about how much thinking he'd been doing, about wanting a traditional family. The words sounded harmless enough until he finally said it, looking me straight in the eye. I want you to quit your job. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because my brain couldn't process that sentence as real. I waited for the punchline. He didn't smile. I'm serious, he continued. I want a wife who's home when I get back. Someone who cooks real meals. Someone who focuses on our family instead of working 60 hours a week. We don't even have kids, I said, still trying to understand where this was coming from. Exactly, he replied. And we won't until you're ready to be a real mother. Not a career woman who hands her kids off to nannies. The phrase career woman hit me harder than I expected, like it was something shameful, something dirty. I reminded him calmly that my job paid for our apartment, our lifestyle, nearly everything we enjoyed. He waved that off, saying promotions were coming for him, that his regional manager had hinted at big things. When I asked, because without my salary, we'd be moving into a studio. That was when his voice hardened. This isn't a negotiation, he said. You quit your job and we build a real family, or I'm done. I can't be married to someone who values spreadsheets over her husband. An ultimatum. After 6 years together, after everything I'd carried for us. I sat there in silence, not crying, not yelling, just feeling something settle into place inside me. It wasn't heartbreak, it was clarity. This wasn't about family, it was about control, about shrinking me down so he could feel bigger. Okay, I said. His face lit up with relief. Really? No, I continued evenly. I choose my career. The relief vanished instantly. He started pacing, accusing me of choosing work over our marriage, saying I was supposed to fight for us to compromise. You said quit, or you leave, I replied. That's not a compromise. That's a demand. He snapped, then saying he'd pack his things and I'd regret this. I'll help you, I said calmly. He stared at me like he didn't recognize me. He expected tears, begging, a breakdown. Instead, I walked to the bedroom, pulled his suitcases from the closet, and started folding his clothes neatly. Where am I supposed to go? He asked finally. Your mom's place, I said, or your brother's. He tried to backtrack to soften the ultimatum, suggesting part-time work, as if that had ever been on the table. But something fundamental had broken. I don't want to be married to someone who sees my career as the enemy, I told him. He left that night with 2 suitcases and a look of complete disbelief, as if the ground had shifted beneath him and he hadn't noticed until it was too late. I slept better than I had in months. The morning after he left, I woke up before my alarm. The city still quiet beneath the windows of the penthouse. For the first time in weeks, my chest didn't feel tight. The space beside me in the bed was empty, but it didn't feel like a loss. It felt like air. By the time I made coffee, my phone was already buzzing. Missed calls, text messages stacked on top of each other. The first few were almost reasonable. We need to talk. Last night got out of hand. Then they shifted. You're being dramatic. You can't just throw away a marriage like this. By the 10th message, the tone turned sharp. You'll calm down. You always do. That line stuck with me. Always do. As if my emotions were a phase he could wait out. I didn't respond. Instead, I changed the entry code to the building and the smart lock on the apartment door. When we moved in 3 years ago, the lease had gone entirely in my name. His credit wasn't great back then, leftover damage from the car repossession I'd helped him recover from, so the property manager suggested keeping it simple. At the time, it felt irrelevant. We were married. Paperwork didn't matter. Now it mattered a lot. I went to work like any other day, sat through meetings, reviewed designs, made decisions that affected entire teams. On the outside, nothing had changed. On the inside, I felt like I was watching my own life from a distance, noticing details I'd ignored before. How often I'd softened my opinions to avoid bruising his ego. How many times I'd justified carrying more because he's trying. By the time I got home that evening, the missed calls had turned into 17. I scrolled through them once, then put the phone face down on the counter. Day 2 brought my first call from his mother. She didn't bother with the greeting. What is wrong with you? She demanded the moment I answered. Good morning to you too, I said, keeping my voice level. My son is devastated, she continued. All he wanted was a real family, a real wife, and you threw him out like garbage. He gave me an ultimatum to quit my job, I replied. I declined. He chose to leave. You made him leave, she snapped. What kind of woman chooses work over her husband? The kind who paid off her husband's debt and supported him through 2 layoffs, I said before I could stop myself. There was a sharp inhale on the other end of the line, then she hung up. I stood there for a moment, phone still in my hand, feeling the final thread of obligation snap. That conversation confirmed something I'd been trying not to name. To them, I wasn't a person. I was a resource. Day 3, he started texting about his things. Not about us. Not about fixing anything, just inventory. I need my gaming setup. When can I get my weights? The espresso machine is mine. The espresso machine had been a birthday gift, bought with my card. But I told him he could come get his belongings as long as I was there. He pushed back, saying it would be easier if I wasn't home. No, I said, I'll be present or it doesn't happen. The word trust hovered unspoken between us, or rather the lack of it. By day 5, the tone shifted again. Reality started to creep in around the edges. I looked at apartments. He texted, "How are you affording that place alone?" I almost laughed. "I make good money," I replied. "You know that." "The lease is up in 4 months," he shot back. "We should renew it in both our names this time." That was the moment I stopped responding altogether. Instead, I called a lawyer. Within an hour, I had a confirmation of what I already suspected. The lease was mine. He wasn't listed as a tenant or an occupant. He couldn't force himself back in. He couldn't claim rights to something he'd voluntarily walked away from, especially not after issuing an ultimatum and leaving. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt braced, like I was standing at the edge of something bigger. Day 6 proved I was right. An unknown number lit up my phone. When I answered, his brother's voice filled my ear, already irritated. "Hey, so my brother wants to move back in while you guys work things out." "We're not working things out," I said. "I'm filing for divorce." There was a pause. Then, "Yeah, he figured you'd say that. Look, he's driving us crazy over here. Can't you just let him stay at the apartment? You can crash with a friend or something." I had to set the phone down. I actually laughed out loud alone in my kitchen, the sound echoing off the marble counters. "So let me get this straight," I said when I picked it back up. "He leaves after giving me an ultimatum, and now I'm supposed to vacate my own apartment so he can be comfortable." "Come on," his brother pressed. "That place is way too big for one person anyway." "Then he shouldn't have left it," I replied. "He accused me of being petty, of tearing the family apart, of causing their mother stress." I ended the call without another word. That night, I stood in the living room and looked around. At the view, the furniture I'd chosen, the life I'd funded. For the first time, I didn't feel guilty for taking up space. Something told me he wasn't done pushing. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of forced calm that usually comes before a storm. I knew he was coming to collect his things, and I knew he wouldn't come alone. People who believe they're entitled to something rarely show up quietly. I invited my best friend over an hour before he was supposed to arrive. She didn't ask questions. She just showed up, set her bag down, and took a seat at the kitchen island like she was clocking in for a shift. Broad shoulders, unshakable presence, zero tolerance for nonsense. I hadn't planned it as a statement, but part of me knew I needed a witness too. Right on time, the intercom buzzed. I opened the door to find my husband standing there with his mother and brother flanking him like backup. He looked thinner already, like the confidence he'd worn so comfortably had started to drain out of him. His mother, on the other hand, looked energized. Angry, but energized, like she'd been rehearsing this moment. The moment they stepped inside, her eyes lit up as she scanned the apartment. "This place is gorgeous," she said, not even trying to hide the bitterness in her voice. "No wonder you won't leave." His brother let out a low whistle. "Man," he said to my husband, shaking his head, "you really gave this up." My husband didn't answer. He just kept his eyes on the floor. They went straight for his gaming setup, first dismantling it piece by piece. I stayed silent, leaning against the counter, watching carefully. Every so often he'd pause like he was waiting for me to say something, to soften, to apologize, to change my mind. I didn't. Then he reached for the television. "That's mine," I said. "We bought it together," he replied without looking at me. I pulled up the receipt on my phone, my card, my purchase. He turned, finally meeting my eyes. "You're really going to nickel and dime me like this?" "I'm not nickel and diming you," I said. "I'm just not giving you things that aren't yours." His mother jumped in immediately. "Let him have something. You're keeping this whole apartment." "I'm keeping the apartment because it's my apartment," I said evenly. "I pay for it. I furnished it. I have the receipts." That's when the dynamic shifted. What they'd expected to be an emotional confrontation was turning into an audit, and they were losing. They moved from item to item, claiming joint ownership of almost everything. The couch, the kitchenware, the artwork. Each time I calmly checked my phone, pulled up bank statements, and shut it down. Years of being organized at work translated surprisingly well to personal life. The espresso machine came up again. "That was a gift," my husband said. "So I can take it, right?" "No," I replied. "It was a gift to you in the marital home. Gifts stay until the divorce is finalized. My lawyer was very clear about that. His mother scoffed. You're a cold, calculating witch. I smiled slightly. Close. 3 hours later, they left with his clothes, his gaming setup, his golf clubs, and whatever dignity he had left. The apartment felt quieter after they were gone, like it had exhaled. That night I received a long text from him, paragraphs of guilt, blame, and rewritten history. He claimed he'd given me everything, that he'd been a good husband, that all he'd wanted was to be prioritized. He warned me I'd end up alone with my career, that money wouldn't keep me warm at night. I didn't respond. What he hadn't thought through was how much of his life had been built on mine. Without my income, the lifestyle he'd taken for granted evaporated. His mother's house was 40 minutes from his job. His brother's apartment was cramped. The places he could afford on his salary alone didn't come with views or amenities or convenience. He'd built a life on my foundation, then tried to tear it down with both of us inside. I was still standing. I filed for divorce the following Monday. I didn't tell anyone first. Not my parents, not friends, not even him. I just sat at my desk during lunch, signed the paperwork electronically, and felt a strange mix of relief and sadness settle in my chest. 6 years of my life reduced to a series of forms and checkboxes. No kids, no shared property, no tangled finances beyond a single joint credit card I'd already canceled. On paper, it was clean. Emotionally, it felt anything but. I thought that would be the end of the escalation. I was wrong. 2 days later, my lawyer called me back after reviewing the initial response from his side. Her tone was professional, but there was a pause before she spoke, like she was choosing her words carefully. He's asking for spousal support, she said. I blinked. For what? He's claiming he sacrificed career opportunities to support your marriage. Specifically, that he relocated for your job and limited his growth. I let out a laugh before I could stop myself, not because it was funny, but because the audacity was almost impressive. He moved because I got promoted, I said. He was unemployed at the time. Yes, she replied. And he made more money after the move. We have the records. I wouldn't worry too much. I hung up and sat there staring out the window, watching traffic crawl below. The man who had demanded I quit my job was now asking the court to make me pay him because I didn't. That week, the personal attacks ramped up. His mother called my parents. I didn't find out until my mom rang me later that night, her voice tight with anger she rarely showed. She told us we raised you wrong, my mom said, that you humiliated her son, that you'll never find another man who'll tolerate you. And what did you say? I asked quietly. I told her our daughter supported her son through unemployment twice, my mom replied. Then your father hung up on her. That small act meant more to me than I expected. Then came the friend group. People I'd known for years started texting carefully worded messages asking what had happened. Apparently, he'd been telling everyone I kicked him out because I was obsessed with work and status, that I chose money over marriage. Funny how quit your job or I leave turned into she abandoned me once the story left his mouth. I stopped explaining myself verbally. I just sent screenshots, his texts, his ultimatum in his own words. The narrative shifted almost immediately. Apologies followed. Awkward silence. A few people disappeared altogether. I learned quickly who valued truth over comfort. The real shock came the following Tuesday. I'd just gotten home from work when I saw him sitting in the lobby of my building. Somehow he'd talked his way past the doorman, probably mentioned he used to live there. He stood up when he saw me like he'd been waiting. We need to talk, he said. We have lawyers for that, I replied, not slowing down. This isn't about lawyers, he insisted, following me toward the elevators. This is about us. There is no us, I said. You ended that. Inside the elevator, the silence pressed in. Then he launched into it, words tumbling out like a rehearsed pitch. I've been thinking, he said. I was wrong to give you an ultimatum. But you were wrong too. We both made mistakes. What was my mistake, I asked. You didn't fight for us, he said. You just let me go. I looked at him, then really looked at him, and saw the truth underneath the frustration and fear. I didn't think you'd actually do it, he admitted quietly. There it was. The confession he didn't mean to give. He'd been bluffing. He expected panic, negotiation, a slow erosion of my boundaries until quitting felt inevitable. That's not my problem, I said. You played a game and lost. His face flushed. It wasn't a game. It was about our future. Our future where I give up everything I worked for because you're insecure about your wife making more than you, I said calmly. The elevator doors opened on my floor. I stepped out. We're done, I said over my shoulder. Talk to my lawyer. He tried to stop the doors from closing, desperation flashing across his face. You can't just throw away 6 years. You threw it away when you made me choose between you and myself, I replied. I just picked myself. The doors slid shut. That night, I had building security formally block his access. The illusion that he still had a say in my life shattered completely. Once the lawyers took over, I expected things to cool down. I told myself that legal processes had a way of draining emotion out of conflict, turning drama into deadlines and paperwork. I underestimated how much resentment he still had left to burn. His lawyer's formal demand arrived 3 days later. They were asking for spousal support $2,500 a month for 3 years. I read the number twice just to make sure I wasn't misreading it. 36 months of me paying the man who tried to force me out of my career because he couldn't stand standing next to it. My lawyer called me immediately after I forwarded her the document. "I've seen a lot," she said, and I could hear the disbelief she was trying to suppress, but this is ambitious. "He says he sacrificed his career," I said flatly. "Yes," she replied. "According to him, he limited his growth to support your marriage." I closed my eyes. Memories flashed through my mind. Him sulking when I worked late, rolling his eyes when I talked about promotions, joking to friends that I was married to my laptop. Sacrifice implied intention. He hadn't sacrificed anything. He'd coasted. "He moved for your job," my lawyer continued, "but he was unemployed at the time. And based on his income records, he earned more after the move. That argument won't land well." That was the first time I allowed myself a small sense of relief. Still, the process dragged on. Weeks of back-and-forth emails, revised demands, thinly veiled threats. Every communication from his side carried the same undertone punishment. If he couldn't control me as his wife, he would bleed me as his ex. Outside the courtroom, the smear campaign intensified. His mother escalated from phone calls to letters, actual handwritten pages mailed to my parents' house. She accused me of emasculating her son, of destroying his future, of being everything that was wrong with modern women. My mother stopped reading after the first paragraph and tore the rest up without responding. Friends I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly felt entitled to weigh in. Some tried to play mediator, urging me to be the bigger person. Others hinted that I should settle quickly to avoid looking cold. I learned to recognize those phrases for what they were, pressure dressed up as advice. Meanwhile, my husband's story kept evolving. To some people, I was obsessed with status. To others, I was emotionally unavailable. To a few, I was manipulative, controlling, heartless. The irony didn't escape me. The man who demanded obedience was now painting himself as the victim of control. I stopped defending myself altogether. Truth doesn't need repetition when it's documented. The screenshot circulated quietly, the ultimatum in his own words. The messages where he said quitting my job wasn't negotiable. People drew their own conclusions. Invitations stopped coming for him, not me. Then, just when things seemed to be settling into an ugly but predictable rhythm, he made one last attempt to reach me directly. Not with anger, not with blame, with nostalgia. He sent a message late one night. No accusations, no demands, just a memory from early in our relationship when we were broke and hopeful and still believed love was enough to fix everything. He wrote about how proud he used to be of me, how things got out of hand, how maybe we could reset. I stared at the screen for a long time before locking my phone and setting it face down on the nightstand. I didn't reply, because I finally understood something that had taken me years to see. He didn't miss me. He missed the life my strength gave him. And I wasn't going to finance his regret. By the time we finally stood in front of a judge, whatever emotional charge the marriage once held had burned itself out. What remained was paperwork timelines, and two very different versions of the same story. His lawyer went first. She spoke about sacrifice, about compromise, about how my husband had put his own ambitions on hold to support my demanding career. She framed him as a man who stepped back so his wife could step forward, a quiet partner who paid the price for love. As she spoke, I watched my husband out of the corner of my eye. He nodded along, solemn, practiced, convincing if you didn't know him. Then my lawyer stood. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't dramatize anything. She just laid out facts. Employment records showing he earned more after relocating. Messages documenting that he issued the ultimatum and voluntarily left the apartment. Bank statements proving our finances were largely separate. The lease solely in my name. No children. A 4-year marriage. Full employment on both sides. "This is not a case of sacrifice," she said calmly. "This is a case of buyer's remorse." I felt something loosen in my chest when the judge leaned forward, flipping through the documents with visible impatience. When it was over, the ruling was almost anticlimactic. 6 months of spousal support. $800 a month. $4,800 total. Not the 36 months he'd demanded, not the punishment he'd envisioned, just enough to acknowledge the marriage existed and not a cent more. I won't pretend it didn't sting to pay him anything at all. Writing that first check felt like swallowing something bitter, but bitterness fades. Freedom doesn't. Property division followed quickly after. Receipts mattered, records mattered, facts mattered. He fought for the espresso machine longer than anything else clinging to it like it represented something deeper. My lawyer finally leaned over and whispered, "Let him have it. It's not worth the billable hours." So I let it go. He left court carrying a box that held a coffee maker and a past he couldn't rewrite legally no matter how hard he tried socially. He moved into a one-bedroom apartment about 30 minutes from his job. No view, shared laundry, thin walls, the kind of place you rent when reality finally catches up to you. He tried once more to complain through mutual friends, framing it as temporary, a strategic step. No one seemed convinced. 3 weeks after the divorce was finalized, I ran into one of those mutual friends at a coffee shop. She hesitated before speaking, then gave me an update I hadn't asked for but somehow needed. "He's struggling," she said. "Not like homeless or anything, just adjusting. Apparently his mother couldn't help financially. Fixed income. His brother had kicked him out after a few weeks, calling him impossible to live with. His car needed repairs he couldn't afford because he was used to unexpected expenses being handled quietly without discussion. And still he told people he'd let me go. Still the hero of his own story. I listened without comment, finished my drink, and wished her well before heading back to my office. That evening, when I got home, I stood in the middle of the apartment and looked around. The silence didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt earned. I changed his old gaming corner into a reading nook, painted the bedroom a color he would have hated, hung a framed letter in my home office, one final note from his mother calling me a disgrace to womanhood, a reminder of exactly what I walked away from. Some people collect trophies. I collected clarity. 2 months after the divorce was finalized, my life stopped feeling like a recovery and started feeling like a direction. The first thing that changed was my relationship with silence. In the beginning, the quiet in the apartment felt sharp, like it was pointing out everything that was missing. But slowly it softened. It became space. Space to think. Space to breathe. Space to hear my own thoughts without filtering them through someone else's insecurity. Work picked up in a way I hadn't expected. 2 weeks after the paperwork was complete, I was called into a meeting with my director in HR. I assumed it was about headcount or budgets. Instead, they offered me a promotion. Bigger team, more responsibility, a title I'd been working toward for years. I accepted without hesitation. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to soften my excitement or downplay the achievement. There was no one waiting at home who needed me to be smaller. My parents checked in often, careful not to push, but always present. One night, my mom asked the question I think she'd been holding back since the beginning. "How are you doing?" she said, "Really?" I told her the truth. Some days still hurt. 6 years doesn't disappear just because you choose yourself. I loved him, or at least the version of him I thought I married. Realizing that someone would rather you shrink than grow leaves a mark. But I also told her this. I wake up every morning knowing I didn't betray myself. That counts for something. I started therapy not because I regretted leaving, but because I wanted to understand how I ended up there in the first place, how I missed the red flags, how I normalized being the sole foundation of a marriage where my contributions were resented instead of respected. It was uncomfortable work, necessary work. Every session peeled back another layer. Control disguised as concern, insecurity framed as tradition, love confused with endurance. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. The updates about my ex slowed over time. When they did come, they were quieter, less dramatic. He was borrowing money from friends, complaining about expenses he'd never had to think about before, still telling his version of the story, though fewer people seemed willing to listen. His mother never softened. About a month after everything was final, she mailed me another letter. This one longer, angrier. She wrote that I had ruined her son's life, that no man would ever want a woman like me, that I'd chosen ambition over my place in the world. I framed it. It hangs in my home office right where I can see it during meetings, not as an insult, but as a reminder of how close I came to giving up everything I worked for, of how far I walked away from control disguised as love. The apartment is still mine. Still too big for one person according to people who never paid a cent toward it. Every room reflects me now, the life I chose, the future I'm building. Sometimes I think about that night at the dining table. the ultimatum delivered with such confidence. He thought it was a power move. He thought I'd bend. What he didn't understand was that when someone asks you to choose between them and yourself, they've already made the choice for you. They're telling you they don't want you. They want a version of you that's easier to control. I chose myself. I kept my career. I kept my home. I kept my self-respect. He kept the espresso machine. My name is Celia Jimenez. I'm 29 years old, and until recently, I believed stability meant safety. I worked as a project coordinator for a mid-sized manufacturing company. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid well and gave me structure. My boyfriend, Daniel Jimenez, was 27. Calm, charming, in a quiet way, the kind of man parents trusted almost instantly. We'd been together for 3 years and living in my apartment for the last 18 months. His parents adored me. They were deeply religious, traditional, and very serious about values. To them, I was the woman who kept their son grounded, the future wife they proudly talked about with friends from church. 2 weeks before everything fell apart, Daniel told me he had a 4-day work conference. Out west, he said. Mandatory corporate training for his marketing role. Boring but important. I nodded, smiled, and told him to have fun, even though something about the way he said it tightened my chest. Daniel usually complained endlessly about work. Stress deadlines, annoying coworkers. This conference appeared out of nowhere. No emails I'd seen, no calendar reminders, no casual mentions leading up to it. Still, I didn't question him. I didn't want to be the suspicious girlfriend, the insecure one. I told myself trust was part of being an adult. That was my first mistake. The night before his flight, Daniel rushed out after realizing he'd forgotten his laptop charger at work. He kissed my cheek, promised to text when he landed, and told me to make dinner without him. That was when I noticed his tablet sitting on the kitchen counter. I wasn't snooping. That matters to me even now. I was cooking and needed a recipe I'd saved, so I picked it up without thinking. It was unlocked. His messages were synced. A notification slid across the top of the screen. Saved contact, regional manager, work. The message read, "I can't wait to finally see you again, baby. 4 days isn't enough, but I'll take what I can get." My hands went cold. I stared at the screen, forcing myself to breathe, telling myself there had to be an explanation, a joke, a misunderstanding, anything that didn't end with my life cracking open. But curiosity quickly turned into dread as I opened the message thread. Months of conversations appeared. Explicit memories, late-night longing, complaints about me, comparisons I never asked for, plans carefully layered over time. The regional manager wasn't his boss. She was Lauren Hayes, his ex-girlfriend from college. They'd dated for 2 years before he met me. According to the messages, they'd reconnected 5 months ago. It started, he claimed, as innocent catching up. Nostalgia. Then it turned emotional, then physical, then deliberate. The conference wasn't a conference. It was a visit to her. She booked the hotel. She planned the dates. 4 days together while I stayed home believing I was loved. I sat at the kitchen table for almost an hour rereading everything. My dinner burned on the stove smoke, curling into the air before I even noticed the smell. 3 years. 3 years of my life. I'd been quietly thinking about marriage, about rings, future plans, shared holidays, all while he was rewriting our relationship behind my back. My first instinct was to call him, to confront him, to demand answers. But then something colder settled in. Daniel wasn't careless. He was calculated. If I confronted him now, he would lie. He would cry. He would twist the story until I doubted what I'd seen with my own eyes. So I stayed silent. He left the next morning at 7:00 a.m. His flight confirmation was still open on his laptop. Departing Thursday. Returning Sunday at 5:30 p.m. 4 days. 4 days to decide who I was going to be when he came back. That night I texted him like nothing was wrong. "Miss you already. Hope the conference isn't too boring." He replied within minutes. "So dull. Wish I was home with you." I stared at the message for a long time before setting my phone face down on the table. That was the moment I stopped being his girlfriend, even if he didn't know it yet. The apartment felt wrong the moment Daniel left. Not quiet, empty, in a way that echoed, like the walls knew something I didn't want to say out loud yet. I woke up Friday morning out of habit, rolled over expecting to see him, then remembered everything all over again. That sick drop in my stomach returned sharper than before. I didn't cry right away. That surprised me. Instead, I lay there staring at the ceiling, replaying the messages I'd seen on his tablet. Not the explicit ones that was too easy. It was the casual lies that hurt the most. The good morning baby texts he sent me while planning weekends with her. The love you he typed with the same fingers he used to tell Lauren Hayes he missed her body. 5 months. I kept circling that number in my head. 5 months wasn't a mistake. It was a second relationship running parallel to mine, carefully hidden. Daniel texted around noon. Made it. Hotel's nothing special. This training is already killing me. I stared at the message until the screen dimmed. That sucks. At least it'll be over soon, I typed back. He responded with a heart emoji. I felt nothing when I saw it. That day passed slowly. I tried to work from home, but my mind kept drifting. Every familiar object in the apartment felt tainted: our couch, the coffee mugs we'd picked out together, the framed photos on the bookshelf. I realized something unsettling as the hours dragged on. If I confronted him now, he would deny everything. He'd say Lauren was exaggerating, that the messages were taken out of context, that I was overreacting. Worse, he might convince his parents that I was jealous, paranoid, unstable. They trusted him implicitly. They loved me, yes, but they believed in their son. Truth needed witnesses. By Saturday morning, that thought had rooted itself deep inside me. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want screaming matches or dramatic ultimatums. I wanted the lies to stop existing in the dark. I opened Daniel's laptop again, this time deliberately. I took screenshots of everything: the messages, the flight confirmation, the hotel booking in Lauren's name. I saved them in 3 places: cloud storage, an external drive, and my own phone. Each click felt like another door closing. Saturday afternoon, I drove aimlessly for nearly an hour, trying to convince myself to let it go, to confront him privately, to end it quietly and walk away with dignity. But then I remembered his parents, how his mother once told me she stopped speaking to her own sister for 2 years after finding out about an affair, how his father spoke about loyalty like it was sacred, how they praised Daniel for being a good man in a world full of temptation. They deserve the truth. Not my version of it, not his excuses. The truth. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table with a notepad, something I hadn't done since college. I wrote everything out, not emotions, facts, flight times, dates, names, messages. A plan began to form, not all at once, but piece by piece. Sunday morning, Daniel texted again. Almost done here. Can't wait to see you tonight. I replied after a pause. I have a surprise planned. That part wasn't a lie. He sent a laughing emoji. You always do. I closed my eyes when I read that, because he had no idea how right he was. By Sunday afternoon, everything was set. The flight details were confirmed. Terminal B, arrival time, 5:30 p.m. I changed out of my pajamas and stood in front of the mirror longer than usual. Not to look pretty, to look steady, like someone who had already crossed the hardest part. I wasn't doing this to hurt him. I was doing it because pretending not to know was hurting me. And when Daniel walked out of that airport, whatever version of our relationship existed in his head was about to end. I didn't sleep much Saturday night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Daniel's messages glowing on that tablet screen, words he never thought I'd read. By morning, my chest felt hollowed out, like something essential had already left me. I made coffee and stood in the kitchen staring at the apartment. For the first time since we moved in together, I didn't see us. I saw borders. What was mine? What was his? Where the lines should have been all along. I started with the closet. Daniel's clothes were still hanging neatly on the right side, exactly how he'd left them. Dress shirts I'd ironed. Jackets I bought him for Christmas. Shoes lined up with care. I didn't rush. I didn't throw anything. I folded each item the way I always had, stacking them into boxes I'd picked up from the storage room downstairs. There was something strangely calming about it. Each shirt folded felt like a sentence ending. Each box taped shut felt final in a way words never could. I packed his toiletries from the bathroom, his books from the shelf, his gaming console. The framed photo of us from a friend's wedding went into the last box face down. I didn't look at it longer than necessary. By early afternoon, 4 medium-sized boxes sat by the front door. Everything that was his, nothing that wasn't. I washed my hands and sat down on the couch, staring at the boxes like they might say something back to me. Instead, my phone buzzed. Daniel's mother. I let it ring twice before answering. Hi, Mrs. Jimenez. Oh, Celia, sweetheart, she said warmly. I was just thinking about you. How's Daniel doing at his conference? I swallowed. Actually, I said carefully, that's why I'm calling. I was thinking of surprising him at the airport when he gets back today. Flowers, dinner, the whole thing. There was a pause, then delight. Oh, that's such a beautiful idea, she said. Your father-in-law, well, your future father-in-law will love that. I forced a soft laugh. I thought maybe you and Mr. Jimenez might want to come too. Make it a family welcome home. She didn't hesitate. Of course, we'd love that. What time does he land? 5:30, Terminal B. I can pick you up around 4. We'll be ready. When I hung up, my hands were shaking. They didn't deserve what they were about to see. That truth sat heavy in my chest. But I also knew this. If I told them privately, Daniel would spin it. He always did. He'd make me sound dramatic, emotional, unstable. This wasn't about punishment. It was about reality. The next step made me feel worse. I needed to know Lauren Hayes would be there. I created a fake social media account with a believable name and a generic profile photo. It took longer than I expected to make it look real. I scrolled through Lauren's public posts until I understood her tone, her interests, the kind of attention she responded to. Then I messaged her. I introduced myself as someone working on a small photography project about emotional reunions at airports. I told her I'd noticed she traveled often and asked if she'd be seeing someone off that weekend. She responded faster than I expected. Actually, yeah. Dropping my boyfriend off tonight. He's flying home. Boyfriend. The word hit harder than I thought it would. I asked what terminal, what time. Terminal B, around 5. Exactly where we'd be. I thanked her, closed the app, and sat there in silence for a long time. My heart pounded, but my mind felt strangely clear. By 4 o'clock, I was in the car, the boxes in the trunk. I picked up Daniel's parents right on time. His father was dressed neatly like he always was for anything involving family. His mother held a small bouquet of flowers, smiling the entire drive. You're such a good woman, Celia, she said softly, taking such good care of our son. I nodded, unable to trust my voice. We reached the airport at 4:45 p.m. I led them toward the arrivals gate and suggested we stand near the doors where passengers exited. Perfect, his father said. He'll see us right away. At 5:15, my phone buzzed. Flight landed. I showed them the arrivals board. Should be out soon. His mother clutched the flowers tighter. I folded my hands together and waited. Time moves differently in an airport. Minutes stretch. Sounds blur together. Rolling suitcases, muffled announcements, people reuniting and separating all at once. I became painfully aware of every second as we stood there, Daniel's parents on either side of me, unaware they were about to watch their son step out of a lie. At 5:27 p.m., people started spilling through the arrivals doors. Business travelers first. Families with children. Couples rushing into embraces. Daniel's mother leaned forward slightly every time someone who looked remotely like him appeared. Any second now, she whispered. My phone vibrated again at 5:30. Gate cleared. My heart started pounding so hard I was sure they could hear it. Then I saw him. Daniel walked through the doors, smiling, his carry-on rolling behind him. He looked relaxed, happy. Beside him was Lauren Hayes, her hand laced through his like it belonged there. She was laughing at something he said, leaning into him like she'd done it 1,000 times before. They hadn't seen us yet. They stopped just beyond the doors, close enough that I could hear the low murmur of his voice. Daniel leaned down and kissed her. Not a quick peck, a slow, deliberate kiss. The kind you give when you think no one's watching. I felt Daniel's mother stiffen beside me. What is she whispered? Her husband inhaled sharply, the sound strained and sharp like it hurt. Lauren pulled back first. Daniel smiled at her in a way I hadn't seen in months. Then he looked up. Our eyes met. The color drained from his face instantly. Mom, he said, his voice cracking. Dad. Lauren turned confused. Who are... Daniel dropped her hand like it burned him. This isn't, he started, then stopped scrambling. I can explain. His father's voice came out cold and unfamiliar. Did you just kiss that woman? Daniel opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. It's not what it looks like. Lauren looked between us, realization dawning slowly. Daniel, she said carefully. You said you were single. I am, he snapped, then looked at me, panic flickering. We were basically done anyway. I stepped forward. News to me, I said calmly. His mother stared at him, her eyes glossy with disbelief. You told us you were at a work conference. Daniel shook his head frantically. Mom, please. We watched you walk out holding her hand, she said, her voice breaking. We watched you kiss her. Lauren took a step back, hands raised. I don't want to be involved in this. You lied to me. She turned and walked away without another word, disappearing into the crowd. Daniel's father put an arm around his wife, his jaw tight. We're leaving. Dad, wait. Don't follow us, his father said. Don't call us. I need time to understand how my son became someone I don't recognize. They walked away. His mother never looked back. Daniel stood there, shaking, tears streaking down his face. I opened the trunk of my car, pulled out the boxes, and set them at his feet. Your things, I said. Everything that was yours at the apartment. I changed the locks this morning. You can't do this, he said hoarsely. You planned this. No, I replied. You planned 5 months of lying. I just stopped pretending I didn't know. Where am I supposed to go? I looked at him for a long moment. That's not my problem anymore. I turned and walked away before he could say anything else. The first 48 hours after the airport were silent. No calls, no messages, no angry voicemails, nothing. At first, I thought Daniel was regrouping, trying to figure out how to twist what had happened into something survivable. But by the second night, I realized the truth was simpler. He was in shock, the kind that leaves you staring at the ceiling, replaying a moment you can't undo. I slept better than I expected. Not peacefully exactly, but without the constant tension I'd lived with for months without realizing it. The apartment still felt strange, but it felt honest. Empty of lies, even if it was also empty of him. The silence broke on the third day. We need to talk. That was it. No apology, no explanation, just expectation. I didn't respond. The next morning, another message arrived. You owe me a conversation after what you did. What I did. I set my phone down and went to work. By day 4, the tone shifted. I can't believe you humiliated me in front of my parents. That was cruel, Celia. I made a mistake and you destroyed my entire life. A mistake. 5 months. A planned trip. A second relationship. All reduced to a word that sounded almost harmless. I typed a response, deleted it. Typed another, deleted that too. Silence felt heavier than any argument I could offer. That evening my phone rang, a number I recognized immediately. Daniel's older sister. I hesitated before answering. I'd always liked her. She was more grounded than Daniel, less dramatic, less defensive. Hey, she said quietly. I'm not calling to yell at you. Relief washed over me. I want to understand what happened, she continued, because what Daniel's saying doesn't make sense. So I told her. Everything. The messages. The fake conference. Lauren Hayes. The airport. I didn't embellish. I didn't dramatize. I just laid out the facts. She was silent for a long time. I knew something was off with him, she finally said. I just didn't think he was capable of this. Neither did I. My parents are wrecked, she admitted. My mom hasn't stopped crying. My dad won't even say Daniel's name. I never wanted to hurt them. I know, she said gently. And honestly, if you'd confronted him privately, he would have lied his way out of it. This way, there's no room for spin. They saw it. That validation settled something inside me I hadn't realized was still shaking. On day 7, Daniel showed up at the apartment. It was nearly 11 at night when the pounding started. Hard, angry, desperate. Open the door, he shouted. You can't keep my things. I opened it but left the chain on. I gave you everything that was yours, I said evenly. You kept my jewelry, he snapped. My grandmother's watch. I looked at his wrist. You're wearing it. He froze, then instinctively covered it with his sleeve. This isn't over, he said, his eyes wild. I'm calling the police. Go ahead, I replied. I have a detailed inventory of everything I packed with photos. And screenshots proving your trip wasn't a conference. Filing a false report probably won't help you. His face flushed with rage. You're a manipulative psycho, he spat. No wonder I cheated. I didn't flinch. If that helps you sleep, tell yourself whatever you need to, I said. But you don't get to rewrite reality. I closed the door. I heard him kick it once, then storm off. Day 10, Lauren Hayes messaged me. She apologized, said she didn't know he was still with me, said she'd blocked him after the airport. I believed her, not because she deserved forgiveness, but because her words matched his sudden desperation. He'd lost both versions of his life in one afternoon. By the end of the second week, Daniel tried a different angle, a formal email. He claimed I owed him $4,000 for his share of the apartment and furniture. I forwarded it to a lawyer friend. He laughed. Daniel's name wasn't on the lease. He'd never signed anything. There was no cohabitation agreement, no receipts, no claim. I responded with one sentence. Please direct any further legal communication to my attorney. That was the last threat he made. On day 18, his father called me. He apologized. Not for the airport, for the position his son had put me in. You deserve better, he said, and you saved yourself from something worse. That call gave me a peace Daniel never could. I hung up, sat on the couch, and let myself breathe. The worst was over, or so I thought. I thought silence meant the damage had finally settled. I was wrong. By day 16, Daniel stopped trying to scare me and started trying to rewrite me. It began quietly. Subtle enough that if I hadn't already lived through months of lies, I might have missed it. A mutual friend texted to check in, her tone hesitant, careful, in a way that immediately set my nerves on edge. Hey, just wanted to make sure you're okay. Things sounded pretty intense. What things, I asked. There was a pause before she replied. Daniel said the relationship wasn't healthy, that you were controlling. Controlling. I stared at the word until it blurred. That afternoon, another message came in. Then another. Different people. Same careful phrasing. No accusations, just concern. Just enough doubt to plant a seed. That was when I understood what Daniel was doing. He wasn't trying to get me back anymore. He was trying to survive his own reputation. By painting himself as the victim, he could turn the airport into proof of my instability instead of his betrayal. If enough people believed it, maybe even his parents would soften. Maybe he could come home with a story that explained everything except his choices. That night, his sister called again. "Celia," she said, and I could hear the exhaustion in her voice. "I need to ask you something. And I want you to know I don't believe it, but I need to hear your side." "Ask." "He's telling people you emotionally abused him, that you monitored his messages, that you were jealous and paranoid, that Lauren was comfort, not cheating." I laughed once, sharp and humorless. "That's convenient." "That's what I told him," she said. "I was around you two constantly. I never saw anything like what he's describing." "Thank you. I just wanted you to be prepared," she added. "He's laying groundwork. This isn't about you anymore. It's about control." After we hung up, I sat in the dark and felt something heavy settle in my chest. Not fear. Clarity. Some people can't face themselves without a mirror that lies back to them. 2 days later, Daniel's best friend reached out. A long message. Careful wording. Moral superiority dressed as concern. "Everyone makes mistakes," he wrote. "You didn't have to destroy him like that. He's lost his parents, his home, his reputation. Haven't you punished him enough?" I typed my response slowly. I didn't punish him. I stopped protecting his lies. Then I blocked the number. On day 21, I heard through mutual friends that Daniel had moved back in with his parents. They let him stay, but with conditions. Strict ones. No going out. No social media. Church every Sunday. Accountability meetings with his father. Full transparency. A probation period measured not in weeks, but in trust. For a man who believed he could live 2 lives without consequences, it was a kind of quiet imprisonment. Lauren Hayes was completely gone from the picture. Apparently, she'd tried to reach out to him after the airport. He'd begged. She'd blocked him. The relationship that cost him everything didn't even last a week once the truth surfaced. The irony wasn't lost on me. By the end of that month, the messages stopped. The rumors faded. People moved on to the next drama, the next distraction. And for the first time since I'd picked up that tablet in my kitchen, I felt something close to peace. Not happiness, but freedom. Still late at night, I asked myself one question over and over. Did I go too far? The answer never changed. Truth doesn't become cruelty just because it's seen. By the 4th week, the noise around Daniel had mostly died down. No more messages, no more surprise calls, no more carefully worded concern from people who didn't really want answers. Life started to resemble something normal again. I returned to routines I hadn't realized I'd abandoned: morning walks, cooking real meals, answering emails without rereading them 10 times. That was when the email arrived. The subject line was formal. Too formal. Financial reconciliation. Daniel was claiming I owed him $4,000 for his share of the apartment and furniture we'd accumulated while living together. The language was stiff, legal sounding, clearly copied from somewhere online. He wrote as if we'd been business partners dissolving a company, not 2 people who once planned holidays together. I read it twice, then laughed out loud. The apartment lease was in my name only. When we moved in, Daniel's credit was bad. He paid half the rent in cash each month, no contract, no agreement. The furniture mine. Every major purchase charged to my card. Couch, bed, TV, kitchenware, everything. I forwarded the email to a close friend from college who'd become a lawyer. He replied within 10 minutes. "He has no case. This is a scare tactic. Respond once. Keep it short." So I did. "Please direct any further legal correspondence to my attorney." I included my friend's firm name and hit send. That was the last message I ever received from Daniel. 2 days later, his father called. I hadn't expected that. Not after the airport. Not after everything. "Celia," he said, his voice slower, heavier than I remembered. "I owe you an apology." I told him he didn't. "I do," he insisted. "Not for what happened at the airport. That needed to happen. But for the position my son put you in. You shouldn't have been the one to reveal his character to us." There was a pause before he continued. "My wife and I have been talking, looking back. There were signs we ignored because we wanted to believe the best. Small lies, blame shifting, shortcuts. We enabled it." I swallowed hard. "You didn't deserve this," he said. "And you deserve better than what Daniel offered you." That call did something Daniel never managed to do. It gave me closure. When we hung up, I sat quietly for a long time, letting the weight of the last month finally settle. Not collapse, settle, like dust after a storm. I wasn't vindicated. I wasn't triumphant. I was simply done. 3 weeks after, the airport life didn't snap back into place. It softened. That was the best way I could describe it. The sharp edges dulled. The constant vigilance I hadn't realized I was carrying finally loosened its grip. The apartment still felt too quiet at times, but it was an honest quiet. No half-truths humming in the background. No second phone lighting up in the dark. I heard through mutual friends that Daniel was officially back living with his parents. Not temporarily, not until things cooled off. Back. They'd taken him in, but on terms that would have felt suffocating to someone like him. No late nights, no social media, full transparency with his phone and finances, church every Sunday, weekly sit-downs with his father about accountability and responsibility. He was working, saving money, and trying apparently to prove he could be trusted again. It sounded miserable, but it also sounded earned. Lauren Hayes had vanished from his life completely. From what I heard, she'd blocked him everywhere after realizing how thoroughly he'd lied. The relationship he'd risked everything for didn't survive exposure. It rarely does. The detail that made me pause was this. Daniel tried to contact her more than once after the airport. Apologies, explanations, promises. She never responded. As for me, I made small changes. I took down every photo of us and put them in a box I didn't label. I donated clothes he'd left behind. I replaced the bed frame not because I needed to, but because I wanted to sleep without memories pressing into the mattress. I rearranged the living room so the space felt like it belonged to me again. A coworker asked if I was dating. I laughed, not bitterly, just honestly. I'm learning how to trust my own judgment again, I said. That takes a minute. Some nights, usually the quiet ones, I wondered if I'd gone too far. Bringing his parents to the airport, letting them see everything without warning, the public unraveling. It had been calculated, intentional. There was no denying that. But then I remembered the messages. 5 months of lies. 5 months of looking me in the eye and reassuring me when I sensed something was wrong. 5 months of making me question my instincts while he lived 2 lives comfortably. What happened at the airport wasn't revenge. It was truth colliding with timing he couldn't control. Daniel's last message came 2 days ago. I hope you're happy destroying us. I didn't reply. If I had, I would have said this. I didn't destroy us. I stopped carrying what you broke. I'm not happy, but I'm free. And for now, that's enough. Tonight, I'm ordering pizza and watching something stupid on television. The kind of show you don't have to think about. The kind of evening that doesn't require vigilance or explanations. It's my first peaceful Sunday in a long time.